I was born in Sydney, Ohio on August 18th in 1892 in a little house across from the creek, which is still standing, by the way. We lived in Sydney until 1900. The first year in school, I attended school in Sydney, and then we moved to Piqua. I went to St. Boniface School there. We lived on New Street, 1416 New Street, and I attended St. Boniface School until 1907 when I had to quit, but I'll tell you more about that later. Margaret and my sister Mildred and myself were all born 3 years apart. Margaret was 3 years younger than I was, and Mildred was 6 years younger than I was. I don't know just how it happened, but Margaret never was real well, and in her last 15 or 20 years of her life, I guess, she was very sickly. I think she lived with tuberculosis. In those days, they called it consumption. She never married. She was living with us at the time when we married, and until Jim was born. She died in 1925, 28 years old. Mildred went to the high school, and she was the only one who did. She went to St. Boniface and to high school there. After that, she started working in Dayton, I think it was. I'm not too familiar about Mildred's earliest days.
Nothing to do, Nellie darling, nothing to do, you say. Let's take a trip on memory ship back to the bygone days. Sail to the old village schoolhouse, anchor outside the school door. Look in and see, there's you and there's me, a couple of kids once more. School days, dear old golden rule days, reading and writing and arithmetic, taught to the tune of a hickory stick. You were my...
It was a German school that I went to. They taught English and German both. We had English and German in religion, in reading and writing and Bible history. They were both taught in English and German.
Couple of kids.
Grandma Megel lived with us, and she wanted us to learn German first. So when I went to school, I could speak German as well as I could speak English.
Darling, and the oak tree that grew on its brow. They've built 40 stories upon that old hill, and the oaks...
Dad was born here in this country, but Grandma came from deeper into Germany than Alsace-Lorraine is from the state line. It's more on the border exactly between France and Germany, and Dad could speak both German and French at one time. But when they landed over here in this country, they settled in a German territory where lots of other German farmers lived. If we had settled in the French community, we'd probably all speak French. I never saw my grandfather because he died before I was born. I knew only my grandmother.
You were my queen in calico, I was your bashful bear.
I spent most of my vacations down at the farm. My mother's brothers all had farms down in Troy. Just outside of Troy, Uncle Tim, Uncle John, and Uncle Ed lived. Uncle Joe, the eldest, never lived on a farm. He lived in the city of Troy. Oh, those were the happy days. This is the first memory I have, I guess you might call it. In those old days, they used to pile straw up very high, and they would have a man standing on top of the hay stile to make certain it didn't fall over. It had to be packed in a special way. Uncle Ed was the youngest, and so to level it, they put him on top. I didn't think he knew much about packing hay, and we were all running around that particular haystack when all of a sudden it toppled right on top of me and fell on me. Well, I was pinned against the fence and the haystack, but there was one board missing from the fence, and so I climbed through there. I was just lucky enough to be able to crawl out of that pile of hay. I got out and I could have suffocated, but I didn't. But I was really scared. We used to go to Uncle Ed Peebles was his name, into the market, to buy things on Saturday morning, and we'd have eggs and we would have butter and scallions and peaches and apples, and we would go into Martin's grocery to trade our stuff. Apple butter and eggs for the farmers, and some flour and sugar and things like that we had to buy because we didn't have those on the farm. In those days, it wasn't many canned foods around because the farmers would always come and bring their apples, peaches, and cherries that they had grown. Lots of time they would have extras, so we would sell some of the melons we brought and to the people we met along the road. Uncle Ed Peoples was selling his melons, and they knew Uncle Ed best melons in the town. My dad was a meat man. He learned his trade out in the West on the prairies, and that's something. He used to go out on a pony with a rifle and a tripod. He would pick out a steer, the one he thought was best, and shoot it down, and then set up his tripod and skin it. He would throw it across the carcass of the backside of the pony and bring it into Hays City, Kansas, and sell it in the market. That's where he learned the butcher trade. Then he came back into Sydney and went into business with Ott Orfall. They bought out the Wagner brothers. The Wagner brothers opened the Wagner Manufacturing Company, the Wagner Hotel, and they also had meats and groceries there. Then they became interested in this manufacturing plan, making cast iron utensils, cookings, and things like that. And then they switched to aluminum afterwards. In 1907 was my last year in school. I didn't quite finish that year because Dad needed someone to help him at the store. The man that had been helping him left, and since I was just about 2 weeks from school to end, he said, "You might as well just come and help me now, because those last weeks won't make any difference." I didn't get to finish my 8th grade. I went to work for my dad, delivering orders on my bike, and helped him in the store. I thought I was doing pretty good, making $2.50 a week for a while, and after a while I was raised to $3 a week. But then I had to give another 50 cents to Mom.
I got a mule and her name is Sal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. She's a good old worker and a good old pal, 15 miles on the Erie Canal. We've hauled some barges in our day, filled with lumber, coal and hay, and we know every inch of the way from Albany to Buffalo.
We had the best meat market in Piqua on Main Street. The Erie Canal was right behind there between Main Street and Spring Street, and the canal ran right behind the store. We used to set up poles and you would fish there. There's bridges over the canal, you know, the kind where you used to have to lift them up when the boats went by just to get under the bridge. The bridges were wound up to leave all those boats get through.
Low bridge, everybody down. Low bridge, for we come into a town. And you'll always know your neighbor, you'll always know your pal, if you ever navigated on the Erie Canal.
You've heard them on records, and you're to meet them in person. 4 men and a guitar, the Mills Brothers.
Hi, Mr. Beverly. Hi, gang.
Now if you meet a suntan lady, full alive and hidey, big brown eyes, little bit shady, that sweet Lucy Brown. Boys in town are dying.
There were some colored boys living right on the other side of the canal on Green Street between Main and Spring. The Mills brothers, their father ran a barber shop under the post office, and that is where I used to get my hair cut. They did more business than any other barber shop in the city. They had 7 barbers there, and you used to have to take a number to get your hair cut. Later on, the kids came over to the store and said, "Mr. Megel, we want a little piece of liver or some little thing to fish with." And oftentimes we would give them a little chunk of liver or a piece of meat or an old bone that they could place on a little hook and fish with that, and catch crayfish with their hands and take those as bait too. And they would go fishing in that canal just right behind the store.
no gal I told you that's sweeter than sweet Lucy Round.
Then came the 1913 flood. I was living at home at that time. I was very active with the YMCA. I was captain of the intermediate team that year, baseball, basketball, and all of the indoor games, and we won the championship that year too. I don't know whether it was Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday night for the interim games. We would go up there and go to the hall that would be open at night. We also had a swimming pool there, and we would have to swim and shower afterwards. This night, our meeting night, was the night that the flood hit Piqua. It was Easter Monday. Saturday it rained. Sunday it rained, and Monday it rained, and the rivers were swelling. We were over at the YMCA that night, and somebody came in and said, "The water's awful high over at Rossville." Our physical instructor there, a man by the name of Kuntz, said, "How about it if we all go there and get dressed and go over to the sea, see if we can give some help to the people that might be in the flood?" So we all went there, quite a little ways from the YMCA. We just got across the bridge and the water was almost up to the bridge, and they were beginning to bring people out of their homes and getting them into boats. There was nothing we could do, and some fellas told me I'd better get home because you can't get down to Green Street anymore. If you go down North Street, you might be able to get through yet. I went down North Street then, and I had to wade to water to get to my home. I told Dad about it, and he was in bed. I told him it looked pretty bad, Dad, and we should go down and stand at the riverbank. So we got up and went down to the riverbank. As we got to the top of the towpath, we looked out over the water, and it was almost even, ready to come over. We just took one look around and ran home and started carrying everything out that was valuable from upstairs. We had a big brass burner in the room, and we had gas lights for the ceiling, you know. We just got on the stair steps. We had an open stairway, and we could go up a stair at a time until finally Dad said, "I'd better go down and turn those lights out. If it gets up that high, the gas escapes, it will be terrible. It will kill us." I waded waist deep in our living room to turn those gas lights off. In the meantime, they had rescue squads all around with all the boats taking people out of those flood districts from their homes. They went to the bungalows first, the one-story houses, and then they finally came down to us. Mother, Margaret, and Mildred, 3 people in a boat. It was around 1 o'clock, maybe in the morning, and it wasn't until 4 o'clock until they finally came back after Dad and I, and that was quite a boat trip, believe me. The second day of the flood, when we were living over the drugstore, that day was worse. Houses came down the river and barns were also lost. We lost our barn because of the flood. I was in the pigeon business, raising squaw. I had pigeons at home. That was in 1913, of course. I lost the pigeon coop in the flood, found parts of the barbed wire way down the road after the floodwaters subsided. Art Awful came from Sydney and needed a man to help him in his store. He needed a meat man, and after counseling Dad, asking his opinion if I should go, because I knew Dad had experience with art, and he said, well, of course, it is your own decision now. If you think you can get along with him, okay. Well, I tried it just kind of for the thrill of it, to get away from home and get to another town, and so I did. And I found me a place to live with the Edgars. Mr. and Mrs. Edgar were just like a mother and dad to me. They had known my parents. They had lived in Sydney also. So I lived there and stayed there with Art Awful and remained there until 1917. And the First World War broke out. Well, on Saturday afternoon, the first week that the office was open for enlistments, those who wanted to go, our quota for Sydney was only 7 men. Those 7 men were picked out by the board, and they had already had their quota filled. But I said, I'm going down there just to put my name in. There might be someone who will back out or who can't pass the examination. And I was a pretty good, healthy youngster at the time, so I went down, took the examination, and passed the next day. Alice Kazad, the girl who I was going with at the time, lived in Dayton, and I thought an awful lot of Alice Kazad. She lived in Dayton, and I thought an awful lot about her. She came up to visit me that Sunday, and I met her at the streetcar station, and while I was waiting for her, I met the chairman of the board from Sydney and casually said to him, I wonder if I passed the examination, and I wondered who the first 7 were going to be. Could he tell me? He said, didn't you get your telegram? And I told him, no, I left early Saturday night and came home. Well, he said, you are one of them, and you'd better make your preparations. I went home and told Mother and Dad, and of course, I'd have to go anyhow. They were drafting all the young fellas like myself, and I thought I might just as well be the first. Because if there's anything good to be gotten out of it, the first ones are going to get it. Well, Mom and Dad felt sad that day. That night I told Alice, back in Dayton, went to her house and told her. The next morning I was one of the first 7 there leaving Sydney.
Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. While you balloon the put to light your fag, smile, boys, that's the style. What's the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. Oh, pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile.
There was supposed to have been a band for us and a parade, but it was pouring down rain. It was just a terrible day, so they put me in one of those covered trucks and took us up to the railroad, and away we went off to Camp Sherman, Chillicothe, Ohio.
Private Cook went a-marching into Flanders with his smile, his sunny smile. He was loved by the privates and commanders for his smile. his sunny smile. When the throng of Germans came along with a mighty swing, Turks yelled out.
That was September, and we stayed at Camp Sherman that whole winter. The snow was so deep there that it was so terribly cold, and there were barricades built right along the ground, and believe me, they were built very light. There were times that we would wake up in the morning and the snow had drifted in through the cracks on the door and up over the ends on top of our bed. The pipes all froze and we had to use hot gas lights to get things cleared out. The following June, we were shipped to France. We went to New York City the first day and only stayed there one night. It was the first time the lights in New York were dimmed. There were rumors that submarines were off the coast. I was placed at headquarters detachment. In that group, there were 13 ships. Convoy. We had the general with us. When we first left New York for France, our general was put in charge of the whole convoy, and we were the first ship. 13 ships in convoy, and the ocean was full of submarines at that time, and we were very careful getting over there. It took us 13 days to go over, and one morning we were told that one of the ships was missing. Well, it was up to us to turn around and to go back for him. The rest of them just sort of stayed together. So we turned around and found the ship, and they had some kind of engine trouble and had to be cut from the convoy. We then turned around and headed for Europe.
Hail, hail, the gang's all here. What's the deuce do we care? What's the deuce do we care? Hail, hail, we're full of cheer. What's the deuce do we care? Hail, hail.
We landed in Liverpool, high up on the dock, and there were a bunch of English girls down on the dock, and they were all hollering, "Got any cents, Yankee? Got any cents?" Meaning pennies. The fellows could throw pennies down, and they would scramble for them.
We love one another, we do, we do, we do, we do, we do, we do, with brotherly love, and it's true, it's true, it's true, it's true, it's true. It's one for all, the big and small, it's always me for you. No matter the weather, when we get together, we drink a toast on you.
At the Inquisition, you might call it, down there, they got your whole history from the time you were born, and they found out that I had some experience with motorcycles, and they needed a motorcycle man. Even when the little experience I had, it was only one that had a motorcycle mentioned on the Inquisition. The men in our detachment were specialty men. Some of them were orderlies and to the officers, and there were also electricians, plumbers, carpenters, and one of the mechanics where I was stated was needed in a field. My experience in the Army were many, and they were very memorable. Like the time we lost our barracks bags. They went on a boat ahead of us, and we figured the British found them and kept what they wanted and threw the rest of them in the canal. We were billeted at the estate of Prince Lechange de Frangé. And since I was in charge of the mess, every chance I'd get, I would give them a loaf of bread. So I became the handyman to the princess, and she always gave the handyman a special job to do. Like if they had the general down there and they wanted to go hunting, I would have to carry the general's gun and then go get the game that he shot down. An air raid one night was the closest we ever came to fighting. When the war was over, when we were coming back, one of the men died on the ship, Clarence Fisher. They had to bury him at sea. I took the flu at that time when I was coming back, and I was very sick. We landed in New York, and I was very sick. I did see the Statue of Liberty, though, and then I had to get back in bed. All the other fellows were discharged. When I got back to Camp Sherman, they took me to the hospital. I was held up for another month. However, I finally did get back to Sydney. Art Orfall wrote me and asked me to come back and offered me a half interest in the store. Well, I thought that was pretty good, and I knew all these people in Sydney. And he put me as part of the owner in the paper. But I found out that when I got back, it wasn't as rosy as I had pictured. He had been drinking and had lost most of his trade. I helped him build it up again, and I stayed until 1925. Alice Kazad, my pre-war girlfriend, had now told me she was going to the convent, and I wished her well and told her I would pray for her, and that's how Alice and I broke up. So I came back to Sydney finally, and I met Frieda Miller. Frieda had a very good girlfriend, Betty Havelmeyer, and Betty's boyfriend and Frieda and I went together a lot to picnics and things. We went together for about a year and a half, and then we got married. We were married in 1921, and it was Wednesday. The first day of June was beautiful.